I was gathering this material and kept thinking, the more we learn about the past, the less we understand how it actually worked. Walls underwater, a strange burial, a pyramid that's hollow inside, the revival of Neanderthals, technologies without explanation. All of this isn't theory, but real discoveries. And after these, history no longer looks so neat. Hello, my friend. You're on the Kurtop channel. Bamboo. In a glacier at an altitude of over 2,000 meters in the Swiss Alps, the melting ice suddenly revealed a strange object. A light two-wheeled cart made of bamboo and ropes with no metal or modern fastenings. The object looks as if it was left there quite recently, but all around was only permafrost. It was found by a random traveler at the Splugen Pass, an ancient route that for centuries was used by merchants and soldiers traveling between Italy and northern Europe. Scientists quickly confirmed that the find was real and apparently less than 100 years old, but that only made the situation even more surprising. Bamboo is a material of Asian origin. In the Alps, it was not used either in transportation or in construction. No archive, no photograph, no description mentions such carts in this region. The design turned out to be well thought out, lightweight, sturdy, and intended for carrying cargo. Experts have put forward several theories. Smuggling during World War II, a homemade device for covert crossings through the mountains, and an experiment with early gliders or mountain transport. But none of the theories are supported by facts. No tools, personal belongings, or traces of a campsite were found nearby. Scientists are increasingly encountering such discoveries. The ice is retreating and revealing not ancient artifacts, but forgotten fragments of the recent past. Things that no one will remember. The bamboo cart became just such a case, a nameless object, without an owner and without explanation. If the answer isn't found now, it may disappear along with the next word. A vessel with opium. For many years, an unremarkable alabaster vessel from ancient Egypt stood in one of the storage rooms of Yale University's museum. No inscriptions, no decorations, nothing that would distinguish it from hundreds of similar items, until researchers decided to study the dark residue on its inner walls. Chemical analysis revealed traces of substances that are hard to explain by chance. In the residue, compounds characteristic of opium were found: morphine, noscapine, and papaverine. This meant that the vessel was not used for incense or oils, as previously thought, and possibly not just on special occasions, but regularly. The strangest thing about this discovery is not the fact of opium use itself, but the scale. It seems that the vessels are found in burials, temples, and residential houses. They are found in different regions and eras. If at least some of them contain the same substances, then opium was not a rarity or a secret tool of priests, but a part of everyday life. Some researchers suggest that such vessels could accompany a person from birth to death, being used in rituals, medicine, and rites of passage. There is even a theory that similar alabaster vessels found in Tutankhamun's tomb originally also contained opium, but it is no longer possible to verify this. The contents vanished long ago, leaving only wall traces. And the question that changes our perspective on ancient Egypt is, who really were the people whose civilization we are used to considering a model of strict sacredness? The recipe for the blade? About 4,000 years ago, there was a culture in the southern Urals that was long considered primitive for the Bronze Age. Settlements, pottery, weapons, nothing would have stood out from the usual picture until scientists decided to closely examine the metal found at one of the burned settlements. More than 100 items were studied: axes, spears, knives, sickles, jewelry, and even ingots. The analysis revealed a strange pattern. These items were not cast haphazardly. A specific metal composition was used for each type of item, as if the craftsman knew exactly which alloy was needed. Right here. Weapons and battle ornaments were made from bronze with a high tin content, hard, durable, and able to hold an edge for a long time. But tools that needed frequent sharpening were cast almost from pure copper, softer but more practical. This is not a coincidence or luck, but a stable technological system. The most unexpected thing was discovered next. Tin is essential. Such alloys are almost never found in the Urals. Traces of micro-impurities showed that the metal came from far away, from the Altai, and from regions of modern Kazakhstan. In fact, we are talking about trade routes that connected the vast expanse of Eurasia long before the civilizations we are familiar with appeared. The settlement where all this was found perished in a fire and was abandoned. But it was this very catastrophe that preserved the metal and allowed us to see what is usually hidden right in front of us. Not primitive blacksmiths, but people who worked according to formulas, passed on knowledge, and participated in a complex system of exchange. And the Bronze Age suddenly stops looking primitive. Why do we need walls underwater? Off the coast of Brittany, near the island of Sin, stone structures were discovered underwater that, at first glance, looked too neat to be a random pile. Straight lines, precise distances between the stones, vertical slabs set as if they were intentionally placed, and all of this is on the seafloor, several meters below the current water level. Archaeologists have documented several such structures at once. The largest one is a wall over 100 meters long, made of massive stone blocks and topped with vertical slabs. Nearby, there are other lines, parallel and intersecting, as if they are part of a single system. Radiocarbon and geological data point to the late Mesolithic and early Neolithic, a time when sea levels were lower and the coastline was very different. Why they were built is still unclear. One theory is that they were fish traps using the tides. Another is that they were defensive or boundary structures. But the size and accuracy of some walls aren't easily explained by simple practical reasons. Another interesting thing is that in Breton folklore, there has long been a legend about a sunken settlement and a nearby bay, which for a long time was considered a myth. Now beneath the water, there are stone lines that look as if someone tried to mark the boundaries of the land, knowing it might disappear. Melted gold coins. In the Roman city of Istria, on the western coast of the Black Sea, archaeologists found a treasure, but in a form that immediately raises suspicion. More than 40 coins and metal ornaments were not neatly stacked, but fused together, as if someone had thrown them into a furnace. Later, it became clear that the treasure perished in a fire almost 2,000 years ago, along with the house where it was hidden. The fire was so intense that the metals melted and solidified, preserving the shape of the wooden box that had long since disappeared. At the same time, the coins themselves remained recognizable, round, with distinguishable outlines. This is a rare case where a disaster did not destroy the find, but literally preserved a moment of life. The house where the treasure was found was far from poor. Stone paving, painted walls, and high-quality ceramics all point to a wealthy family. Archaeologists suggest that the owner either didn't have time to save the valuables or simply didn't expect the fire to destroy everything in just a few hours. Istria was an important city of the Roman Empire during the Principate era, but even here, people lived with a sense of instability. A treasure, hidden and lost at the same time, shows how fragile the order we are used to considering strong really was. A ship next to the beach just 2 meters underwater by one of the most popular beaches of Majorca. Archaeologists discovered a Roman merchant ship. It was lying right under Playa de Palma, a place where tourists swim every day. The ship sank about 1,700 years ago and was almost immediately covered by sand, which is what saved it from being destroyed. The vessel, about 12 meters long, was filled with amphorae. Inside, wine, olive oil, and garum, a fermented fish sauce, were some of the main products of Roman trade. Under the mast, they found a coin from the early 4th century minted in Sicily, in what is now Croatia. This made it possible to accurately date the shipwreck. The hull, the deck, and even the wooden structural elements were preserved better than expected. Among the finds were leather shoes, a carpenter's drill, an oil lamp depicting the goddess Diana, and inscriptions on amphorae with the names of the producers and tax marks. Some of the vessels bear early Christian symbols, while others have traditional pagan signs. Analysis of the clay showed that the amphorae were made in the southeast of Spain. This confirms the existence of stable trade routes between Iberia, North Africa, and the Balearic Islands during the late Roman period. The ship tried to shelter from the storm near shore but failed to reach the harbor. The amphorae and items from the ship have now been sent for conservation, and the wooden parts of the hull are planned to be extracted and restored in stages. The process will take several years. In Roman Britain, archaeologists discovered burials that immediately stand out from the usual picture about 1,800 years ago. The bodies of the deceased here were covered with a thick plaster-like mixture. Pouring it directly inside stone and lead sarcophagi, the material would harden, following the contours of the body, almost like the casts in Pompeii. But that turned out not to be the main thing. While clearing out one of these sarcophagi, researchers noticed clear fingerprints. The traces of a hand that had spread and pressed the mixture by hand remained on the surface of the plaster inside the coffin and were hidden until the layer began to be scanned in 3D. This is a rare case when archaeologists record not just a ritual, but the direct physical action of a specific person. Previously, it was believed that the plaster was poured while very hot, but the fingerprints showed that the material was soft and pliable, which means it was applied slowly, touching the body and the walls of the coffin. The traces are located along the inner edges, as if someone was carefully smoothing the surface. Researchers hope to find out who this hand belonged to. There is a chance that traces of DNA have been preserved in the plaster, but the likelihood is low. So far, only one thing is clear. This method of burial required close and prolonged contact between the living and the dead. Ancient shells sound out. At archaeological sites in northeastern Spain, large seashells have long been found, and they were considered ordinary food remains, until researchers noticed one strange detail. The tops of all the shells had been carefully removed. That's exactly what you do if you're going to use the item not as a container but as a horn. The scientists decided to test this in practice. They took 12 shells about 6,000 years old and tried blowing into them. The result was unexpected. The sound was not just audible, it reached up to 111 dB, which is as loud as a car horn or a running chainsaw. Analysis showed that the shells were collected already empty. Traces of marine organisms inside indicated that no one ate the snails. People were interested specifically in the sound. Such signals could be heard over long distances and used for communication, warnings, or rituals. No images, no inscriptions, no text, only form, breath, and the sound that spread across the landscape thousands of years ago and has now been heard again. In one of the 10th century burials in Sweden, archaeologists found a small silver pendant. It didn't look rich or stand out in size, but its shape immediately drew attention. The ornament depicted a woman with a rounded belly, an emphasized pose, and hands placed under her belly as if protecting it. For Viking Age art, this is an extremely rare subject. The pendant was discovered back in the early 20th century, but for a long time it remained almost unnoticed. Only later did researchers pay attention to the details. The figure is wearing a cloak decorated with beads, and the lines above the head resemble a headdress or a crown. Some archaeologists associate this image with the goddess Freya, the patroness of fertility and birth. The context of the burial raises more questions. Nearby, they found silver rings, an Islamic coin, a bone game board, and a staff with a wolf's head. Such a set indicates high status and a possible ritual role of the woman. At the same time, such items are almost never found in later graves, which may indicate a period when pagan traditions were already being displaced by Christianity. This pendant remains a rare visual testimony of how the Vikings viewed pregnancy not as a mundane detail, but as a condition worthy of a symbol and protection. The gold of the steppe elite. In the mountains of southeastern Kazakhstan, archaeologists have excavated burial mounds that had long remained outside major research efforts. The Zhetisu region was known for its abundance of monuments, but these particular burial sites had not attracted attention until recently. Beneath the layers of earth, graves belonging to the Saka elite from the 4th to 3rd centuries before Christ were discovered. Inside, they found gold jewelry, earrings, beads, bronze pins, and rare items with distinct symbolism. One of them is a bone artifact in the shape of a snake dragon. Its purpose is not completely clear, but researchers believe that it was connected to spiritual beliefs and protection. Gold here was not used as a display of wealth, but as a sign of status and belonging to a certain group. Special attention was drawn to the double burial of a woman and a child. Next to the child's skull were golden earrings. The child was about 3 years old. This made archaeologists wonder how early status could be assigned to a person and passed on by birth. One of the burial mounds reached 40 meters in diameter and 4 meters in height. The scale of the work and the quality of the artifacts show that we are not dealing with scattered tribes, but with a society that had a clear hierarchy, rituals, and ideas about power that extended far beyond the life of a single generation. Why do the stones move? On the dried-up bed of racetrack playa? In Death Valley, heavy boulders are scattered around, leaving long trails behind them. The tracks stretch for tens and hundreds of meters, sometimes making sharp turns, sometimes running parallel to each other. The problem is that almost no one has actually seen the stones move. It's as if they move by themselves. Since the early 20th century, scientists have proposed all sorts of explanations, from hurricane-force winds to magnetic anomalies. The solution only appeared in the 2010s when researchers placed global positioning system sensors on the stones and began years of observation. One of the boulders, weighing over 300 kilograms, didn't move for several years and then ended up 800 meters from its original spot. It turned out that movement is only possible when rare conditions coincide. After it rains, the ground is covered with a thin layer of water which freezes at night. In the morning, the ice cracks into large plates and begins to slowly slide over the mud. Under the influence of the wind, these ice sheets act like sails, pushing against the stones and moving them forward. The process is so slow that the human eye can hardly notice it. The stones don't roll or bounce, they drift. That's why for decades only the tracks remained. And there are no obvious explanations as to why the pyramids are empty. The Great Pyramids of Giza are still officially called the tombs of the pharaohs. This version is so familiar that it is rarely questioned. The problem is that after 2 centuries of research, not a single ruler's body, no mummies, no burial complexes, and no traces of burials that could be definitively linked to the pharaohs have been found inside the pyramids of the 4th dynasty. The stone sarcophagi found inside have always been empty, and the walls lack any painted texts. This stands in stark contrast to the richly decorated tombs of later periods. The narrow shafts, hidden chambers, and complex internal geometry looked more like an engineering system than a space for burial rituals. Even in antiquity, this sparked debates. Herodotus wrote that Cheops was supposedly buried in an underground chamber connected to the Nile by a canal, but modern ground-penetrating radar has not revealed any such structures. Diodorus Siculus suggested that the pharaohs deliberately left the pyramids empty, fearing looting, and chose other places for their burials. But then a new oddity arises. If the pyramids were looted, why did the bodies disappear and not the statues? In the Pyramid of Khafre, there is still a massive diorite statue, an object that looters could have destroyed or taken away. First of all, in the Valley of the Kings, on the contrary, mummies were preserved and even reburied after robberies. The scale of construction also raises additional questions. Pharaoh Sneferu built 3 large pyramids at once. That's too much for a single soul, but quite logical for a state program with a different purpose. Some passages are oriented toward specific stars, and the proportions of the structures point to complex cosmological ideas. So alternative theories are increasingly being voiced, that the pyramids are symbolic monuments, astronomical markers, elements of religious infrastructure, or architecture to embody the idea of the ruler's ascension. There is still no answer. There are only empty chambers, perfect geometry, and a sense that we still do not fully understand the purpose of these structures. What are these pipes? In the mountains of China, on the slopes of Mount Baigong in Qinghai province, there is something that has fed ufologists for years better than any Roswell. Hundreds of rusty metal pipes stick out directly from the rock, some as thin as needles and others up to 40 centimeters in diameter. Some of them lead toward the Salt Lake about 80 meters away. And the most intriguing part of this story, many of the pipes look as if they were fused into the stone too deeply, too evenly, and too strangely for a place where almost no one lives, only the occasional nomad. The first studies only added fuel to the fire. The composition seemed ordinary, 92% familiar minerals and metals, but the remaining 8% was classified as an unknown material, and that set everything in motion. An alien base, a laboratory, space infrastructure. The mountain even got a monument with a flying saucer because the legend became stronger than common sense. But then something happened that I love most about archaeology. Reality turned out to be not more boring than the myth, but just uncomfortably clever. Modern analyses have shown organic plant traces, and the microstructure resembles annual rings. And the theory is that these are not pipes in the usual sense, but petrified casts of ancient tree roots. Water from a long-vanished lake once carried the roots, and then processes of soil formation and the transformation of soil into rock took place. They were preserved in such a way that today it looks like a man-made object. So there are no alien plumbers. It's just that the planet knows how to create scenery that looks like evidence. They decoded it. Scientists have been studying mammoth DNA for a long time, using it to reconstruct relationships, mutations, and the approximate appearance of extinct animals. But all of this is just a blueprint. Until recently, it was impossible to understand exactly how the living mammoth's body functioned. The reason is simple. Ribonucleic acid is considered too fragile and breaks down much faster than DNA. It was believed that it couldn't survive for thousands of years, let alone tens of thousands. That's why the discovery made in the Siberian permafrost became a turning point. For the first time, scientists managed to extract and decode ribonucleic acid molecules from the tissue of a woolly mammoth about 40,000 years old. This is the oldest ribonucleic acid that science has ever worked with. The sample belonged to a young mammoth calf nicknamed Yucca, which was found in an exceptionally well-preserved state. The ribonucleic acid turned out to be more than just fragments. It preserved information about which genes were active during the animal's lifetime. Scientists discovered sequences responsible for muscle function and metabolism under severe stress. This allowed them to make a cautious but alarming conclusion. Before its death, the mammoth was likely experiencing severe physical stress, possibly due to a predator attack or a struggle for survival. The discovery of microRNAs, molecules that regulate gene activity, turned out to be even stranger. Some of them are not found in modern elephants. Overall, this means that mammoths had biological mechanisms that completely disappeared along with the species. For the first time, archaeology and genetics have looked not just into the past, but into the living biology of an extinct creature. Not just what it was like based on its bones, but how its body actually worked. The cursed jewelry of the shaman woman is not a story from ancient times, but it perfectly shows how the same mechanisms of belief work as they did thousands of years ago. In Austria and Germany, for several years in a row, there was a woman who presented herself as a shaman. She convinced her clients that their jewelry and money were infected with a curse or an evil spirit. Sometimes it wasn't just about misfortunes, but about the supposed prediction of a loved one's death. The scheme was simple and frighteningly effective. To lift the curse, the victim had to hand over gold, jewelry, and cash for a cleansing ritual. The amounts reached hundreds of thousands of euros. After the valuables were handed over, the shaman would disappear, and later her accomplice would report that during the ritual she had fallen into a coma or died. That was the end of the contact. The investigation established that the scheme had been operating for more than 10 years and affected at least 19 people in Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. The total damage is estimated at millions of euros. During the searches, the police found dozens of kilograms of gold jewelry, gold bars, large amounts of cash, and an entire fleet of luxury cars. The most alarming thing here is not the scale of the scam, but its mechanism. People handed over their valuables not out of greed, not out of naivety, but out of fear. The same feeling of fear that for centuries made people offer sacrifices. Bury gold in the ground and believe that an object can be a bearer of misfortune. A stone city made of shells in Western Australia, just a couple of hours' drive from Perth, is a place that looks like a set from a movie about an alien planet. The Pinnacles Desert, thousands of stone spires jutting out of the sand. Some look like columns, others like mushrooms, and others like fragments of walls. Some of them reach up to 3.5 meters in height, and in the sunset light they cast long shadows, turning the landscape into a stone labyrinth. For a long time, these formations were thought to be either remnants of ancient structures or the result of unusual erosion. In reality, the story turned out to be even stranger. Tens of thousands of years ago, there was an ocean here. After it receded, huge masses of seashells remained on the surface, which over time were compressed and turned into limestone, and then the wind came into play. Slowly, millennium after millennium, it blew away the soft sand, leaving only the densest cores behind. Thus, The shells that once lay on the seafloor became vertical spires in the middle of the desert. No volcanoes, no tectonics, no human hands, just water, limestone, and time. Similar formations can be found in other parts of the world, but nowhere else are they gathered so densely and over such a large area. That's why the pinnacles are easily mistaken for the ruins of a vanished city that never existed, but looks too convincing to be a coincidence. Why was butter buried in the bogs? In the peat bogs of Ireland and Scotland, archaeologists regularly find strange hoards, barrels and bundles of butter that are hundreds or even thousands of years old. The butter doesn't look like food anymore, but rather a dense dark mass with a strong smell. And every time, the same question arises. Why did people willingly bury such a valuable product in the bog? For a long time, it was believed that these were ritual offerings. In Northern Europe, bogs were often used for offerings to the gods. People would throw weapons, jewelry, and even humans into them. Butter, as a symbol of wealth and prosperity, was quite suitable for such rituals. But the problem is, there are just too many finds. Over the past 200 years, more than 400 cases have been documented. For a rare ritual, that's suspiciously frequent. Later, another more practical version emerged. Peat bogs are almost devoid of oxygen and rich in acids. In such an environment, the bacteria that cause decay hardly function at all. Experiments have shown that meat and fat left in peat for several months have pathogen levels comparable to products from a modern freezer. For people of the Bronze and Iron Ages, this was the perfect natural refrigerator. But even here, not everything adds up. Some barrels were buried too deep and too carefully, as if they weren't meant to be retrieved. Then a third hypothesis emerged. The buried butter underwent fermentation, changing its composition, taste, and smell. Modern tasters described it as a product with mushroom and smoky notes. So the bog could have been a storage, a laboratory, and a sanctuary all at once. And each new barrel leaves the question open. It was buried to preserve it, to change it, or to give it away forever. The burial of a dog with a dagger. Archaeologists in southern Sweden have discovered a find that overturns our understanding of how animals were treated in the Stone Age. In a marshy area near the vanished Lake Laxamossen, they found an almost complete skeleton of a dog, deliberately buried deep under the peat, next to an elegantly crafted bone dagger about 25 centimeters long. The burial dates back to approximately 3,300–2,600 before Christ. So this is not just random trash from ancient settlements, but a deliberate act by people who clearly attach special significance to the dog. The remains were discovered during the construction of the Ostlinken railway line, and the way the animal's bones and the dagger were arranged suggests not an accidental death of the pet, but a ritual practice. The position of the body, the use of stones to keep the remains in place, and the object next to it. They suggest that the dog may have been deliberately placed at the bottom of the former lake so that it could accompany a person or the community into the other world. Scientists may be able to revive Neanderthals. Just 10 years ago, the idea of bringing Neanderthals back sounded like pure science fiction. But today, scientists talk about it without a smile. The Neanderthal genome has been almost completely decoded, and DNA editing technologies are developing so quickly that some experts believe theoretically this could become possible within the next 20 years. Of course, we're not talking about cloning in the usual sense. There are no living Neanderthal cells. All we have are fragments of DNA from bones. The idea is different. To take a human cell and using gene editing, replace key sections of its DNA with Neanderthal DNA. As a result, you would get an embryo that is as close as possible to the extinct species. But this is exactly where the toughest questions begin. Such an embryo would have to be carried either in the body of a modern woman or in an artificial womb, technologies that are still being developed. At the same time, no one can guarantee that the mother's body won't reject the fetus, or that the child will be able to develop normally. There is also another, less technical, but much more difficult aspect. Even if the Neanderthal is born, what kind of world will he find himself in? He won't have his own tribe, language, or culture. He'll be the only representative of a species that disappeared tens of thousands of years ago. And here a paradox arises. We are already partially Neanderthals. Most people outside of Africa have up to 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genome. Their legacy has long lived within us, and perhaps the question is no longer whether we can bring Neanderthals back, but whether we have the right to do so. The largest ancient labyrinth in India, in the steppes of Burmani in the west of the country, archaeologists came across a huge stone labyrinth, estimated to be about 2,000 years old. This isn't just a stone pattern or a drawing fragment. This is a full-size structure, built in such a way that it forms 15 concentric circles leading to the center, and it is considered the largest known stone labyrinth found in India. Such a design is not an abstract drawing, but a logical, well-thought-out structure that could have had a ritual or navigational purpose. According to one hypothesis, these labyrinths served as landmarks for ancient merchants and travelers, helping them navigate routes that connected the shores of the west coast with the interior parts of the peninsula. The similarity of the pattern to examples found on ancient Roman coins provides grounds to speak of cultural and trade connections between India and other civilizations of that time. It's surprising that the monument was discovered by accident. It was noticed not by archaeologists, but by wildlife researchers during their routine work in the fields. Such a discovery reminds us how much is still hidden beneath the surface of the earth, and how ancient people could use shapes that appear mysterious to us today. When people talk about medicine in ancient Egypt, they usually imagine spells of the gods and primitive procedures, but archaeological finds break this image quite harshly. Let's start with a prosthesis. In one of the tombs, an artificial big toe made of ebony and leather was discovered. For a long time, it was considered a burial attribute until it was found that it was worn down, just like things that are used during life get worn out. The toe was attached with straps, replicated the anatomy of the foot, and allowed a person to walk normally in sandals. It was not a symbol or a ritual, but a functional medical device. Teeth. The Egyptians constantly suffered from dental problems because their flour and bread were full of sand and stone dust from the millstones. Their enamel wore down early, and here archaeologists find strange constructions. Teeth fastened with gold wire, sometimes foreign ones inserted in place of lost teeth. This doesn't resemble modern dentistry, but it's an attempt to restore function, not just to endure pain. Even pharaohs were no exception. The mummy of Ramesses II was found to have severe gum inflammation, abscesses, and decayed teeth. Judging by the evidence, he was in constant pain, and this was despite all his power and resources. Egyptian medicine didn't make people immortal, but it tried to make life as bearable as possible. Pain relief is of particular interest. In the papyri, a mixture of plants, vinegar, alcohol, and opium, poppy is described, and traces of opiates have also been found in vessels. This doesn't mean that surgeries were painless, but the Egyptians definitely understood that pain could be dulled, not by magic, but by substances that actually affect the body. Medicine and religion were not separate for them. An illness could be considered the work of a demon or the wrath of the goddess Sekhmet, but it was treated in a very practical way, with bandages, ointments, and surgery. Spells were recited not instead of treatment, but along with it. For the Egyptians, this was not a contradiction, but a single system. As a result, a picture emerges that stands out from the usual. This is not primitive ancient medicine, nor is it a miracle ahead of its time. This was a society that carefully observed the body, experimented, made mistakes, and left behind strange but surprisingly practical solutions, from prosthetics to pain relief. The past doesn't have to be convenient or understandable. Sometimes it just leaves a trace and moves on without explanation. Thank you for watching this video until the end. Goodbye, everyone.